Welcome, everybody. I will be telling you a story today. Um, and it's a story that takes place over many years, over nearly 40 years, and it takes place in different places. And of course, as you've come expecting, Bhuribai is the central character, but through her, we're going to meet a number of people, a number of ideas, and really also try and understand what it means to work collaboratively with an artist and what we can learn about the wider art space in India by talking to an artist who has sort of lived through it. And without any more ado, I'll get into it. The first section is called a serendipitous meeting because the story begins there actually. In 1980 or 81, like I said, 40 years ago, a very young 17-year-old Bhil girl who's just married, she arrives in the big city. This is Bhopal, which is Madhya Pradesh. Madhya Pradesh is India's heartland, really, and Bhopal is its capital. And she's come a long way. She travels nearly 350 kilometers to make a home and a living. She grew up in Pitol. You can see it marked by that red marker. And Pitol is a very tiny village, barely shows up on the map. It's at the border of Madhya Pradesh and Gujarat. It's a dry place. It's full of forests, or at least it was in the 80s. And she grew up there. Um, it was a very hard and happy life. She belonged to the Bhil indigenous community, and they were very resource poor when she was growing up. So she spent most of her days in the forests, in the land, by the rivers, grazing cows, collecting wood, helping her family make ends meet. And then when she was 17, she made her way to the city. Um, in Bhopal, she found employment at a construction site as a daily wage laborer. She wasn't alone. Hundreds of other indigenous people were migrating to the city in search for economic opportunities as India was rapidly urbanizing and, buildings were being made and so on. It was here at this construction site, and she might very well be one of these young girls seated here because this photo was taken while she was employed there. At this construction site, a chance encounter would go on to change her life. This woman, this young girl, her name is Bhuribai. When Bhuribai came every day to work at the construction site, they mostly stayed amongst themselves. But one day, a man approached them. His name is Jagdish Swaminathan. So he approached the workers, and he has come actually with a mission. He's got a mission in mind. He is looking for artists. He recognizes that these are indigenous workers, these are indigenous peoples, and he believes that any of them could have been an artist. Why does he believe this? He has spent the last few years actually traveling through India's heartland, which is northern, central, western India. And he has seen a lot of art in these places. And he knows that anybody and everybody in these villages makes art. So when he sees these young people out here toiling away, he approaches them and he asks them, who amongst you can paint or draw? Who amongst you has ever made a drawing before? And of all the people seated there, only one person actually had painted before, and that was Bhuribai. So she steps up and she says, well, me. Bhuribai, very long ago when she was a child, had made drawings. Now, she had made drawings using earth, soot, twigs, and leaf pastes on the walls of her home. But it wasn't common practice amongst a community. In fact, the only people amongst the Bhils who really make drawings are male priests. And the drawings they make are called Pithora paintings. These are very ritual, religious paintings that are made. Mostly it involves men. Women are not allowed to sit and watch, especially not young girls, but she would watch them clandestinely. And later on, she would try and make drawings by herself using whatever material she had. So she stands up and she tells Swaminathan, I've made drawings before. And that is when he gives her a roll of brown paper. And so, for the first time outside of her childhood drawings, a very nervous, apprehensive young girl, she sits down to make drawings. And she's really encountering paper, paints, a brush for the first time. What did she paint then? She was stumped by the question. She asks herself, what do I paint? She asks Swaminathan, and Swaminathan tells her, well, you paint whatever comes to your mind. And because she could think of nothing else, she drew memories of home. icons that she had seen growing up, tattoos, motifs. She had seen in Bathora painting. She drew animals, she drew plants, and scenes remembered from a life spent elsewhere. When Bhuribai made this first set of paintings, which you see photographed here, he paid her for them. And I quote Bhuribai here. She says, "It struck me that for each day of labor, I earned 6 rupees, and yet for sitting and painting, I earned 10 rupees a day. All of this was a bit strange for me, but I felt good that they were paying me so much. I promised myself that the next time Swaminathan came, I would paint more beautifully and I would paint whatever came in my mind. I would put more effort into my painting. It was a great venture for me." Puribai's encounter with paints and the brush is momentous and it would go on to have an incredible impact not only on her life, but really it's the reason you and me and all of us are sitting here today, because it has changed the way we experience and understand indigenous art and, of course, Bhil art. I would like to say Bhil art in little apostrophe commas. Her simple act of drawing, a very brave step for a young girl who was all alone in a new city, just married. It was a very brave thing. She recalls being very nervous. It would be the first step in what would go on to be a very meteoric rise as an artist. And today we are thinking about Bhil art. We're going to talk about women. We're going to talk about indigenous art. In a way, we are talking about all of this because of that one chance meeting. Of course, Bhuribai went on to become a very celebrated contemporary artist. She's an illustrator, she's a muralist, she works, she exhibits, she has traveled and shown internationally. Her works have hung alongside other master painters. She's really firmly placed within contemporary art in India, and she has received government awards, she has received presidential awards. She's, in fact, I think it was last couple of years ago, she received India's fourth highest civilian award, the Padma Shri. She's had a long career. It's been 40 years, I think, since then. But let us shift our focus from Bhuribai for a moment. Let us look at that construction site where she had her chance meeting with Jagdish Swaminathan, because this is a story where Jagdish Swaminathan and that building, that she was helping build, it's called the Bharat Bhavan. Both of those spaces play a very important role. Bharat Bhavan and the Scouts, those are plans for the Bharat Bhavan building that you see on your screen. So in the 1970s and 80s, India was witnessing a very invigorated government interest in the arts, and the government was really pumping a lot of money into building cultural institutions, especially in capitals across all its states, and financing them. In Madhya Pradesh's capital city, the Bharat Bhavan was being planned as a multidisciplinary center with galleries, workshops, spaces, theaters, auditoriums, and open air amphitheater, and so on. And they really roped in some of the best people in the country to help put it together. In fact, the architect is one of our beloved modernists, Charles Correa. And as we saw earlier, hundreds of local and by local, I mean like coming from nearby states, a lot of migrants poured in to help build this cultural complex. And while it was being built, already its first director had been appointed. And who was this first director? It was Jagdish Swaminathan, who by then was already a pretty well-known poet, an activist, an artist with his own thriving practice. And so the building was built. And in 1982, India's then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi came to inaugurate it. In the opening exhibition, and Bhuribai was very surprised to find out those first paintings that she had made for Swaminathan, they were displayed in that first opening exhibition. Where were they displayed? Amongst the many complexes at Bharat Bhavan, one of them is an art gallery. It's called the Rupankar Art Gallery. It exists even today. And right from the beginning, Swaminathan, who was the director, planned Rupankar Gallery to have two wings. One would have urban contemporary art, and the other, he wanted it to house exclusively what he was then calling folk and Adivasi art. He really went to great lengths to ensure this. He was helped by a lot of other people who shared his interest, but why was an entire wing dedicated to Adivasi art? And we'll come to that. It's because of Swaminathan. You see, Swaminathan belonged to a school of thought that had been brewing amongst India's young and middle aged modernist painters for some time, particularly in Baroda. Now, in Baroda, you had a art school. Actually, it was the Faculty of Fine Arts in the Maharaja Sayaji Rao University. It still exists today. A remarkable institutions where some of India's biggest modernist artists were trained. And there was a new way of thinking brewing. These artists were really looking for a truly Indian, I would say, homegrown approach to making art. They said art making simply can't be an imitation of modernism in Europe. It can't simply be us responding to Europe's many modernisms, which had happened by then. What they were doing was trying to form an artistic identity for Indian art and also grappling and negotiating with Western art forms that were being taught in their schools. A few of these teachers and students at Baroda and their friends and people in their circles had begun looking inward, and they had set out in search for living traditions. What did living traditions mean? They believed that thriving in India's villages were art traditions, not somewhere in the past, but very much alive, were art traditions that really existed and nobody had taken the time to go and look at them and learn from them. And so Swaminathan was one of the few artists who said we must go and look for these art forms. So the search was also driven by an awareness that these art forms, they were very worried that, modernization was happening, urbanization was happening, and they were worried that if they didn't go out to the villages and look for the art that was being made there, it would all disappear. And so they ventured out. Here you see Swaminathan photographed in sometime in the early 1980s. He's seated with people of the Korwa indigenous community. That's him on the left with the long hair. And here is a quote that I'd like to leave with you. So in the years that Bhuri Bai and other young laborers were building Bharat Bhavan with their hands, Swaminathan was busy. He had actually gathered groups of students from government art colleges, and they set out with a mission to find art. And they traveled India's heartland. It's where some of India's largest indigenous communities live in present-day Gujarat, Maharashtra, parts of Maharashtra. You have Madhya Pradesh, you have Chhattisgarh, you have Jharkhand. And they were all simply looking for art and artists. This is a quote. When Swaminathan writes about it later, he recalls it, and he talks about how they were bathing in this. What does he say? We were taking a bath in humanity every day. Here are some photographs that they made during these trips. I'll show you more of them. In these villages and settlements, and you'll see from the photos, they really encountered art, exactly what they'd set out to find. There was pottery, there was paintings and drawings and sculptures. They were in homes, they were in shrines, they were on the roadside, they were in forests, they were on people's bodies. It was incredible for them to encounter this. There was this diverse and stunning profusion of symbols and shapes and images. They had been created by men, by women, by old, by young, and they had been made in domestic contexts. They'd been made in ritual context, they'd been made in utilitarian context. It was really stunning what they found in these villages. And they also saw that these art forms were being made and erased sometimes. Sometimes they were made and preserved, as you can see from tattoos, and sometimes they were made and forgotten. Art really infused everyday life. And this was a revelation. And on these trips that Swaminathan went out on, sometimes he was accompanied by his friend, a photographer, an artist, Jyoti Bhatt, who took hundreds of photographs. I can only show you very few today, but I hope you see what I mean when I say it was a revelation for them. On homes, on floors, wherever they went, they were looking for art, and eventually they found it, and they found it in such a stunning array around people's homes. It was just so much a part of everyday life. So when Swaminathan saw this in the villages, and he was convinced he would find it, he'd found it, he was quite sure that these artists could really be anybody. And it was in this conviction, from this conviction was born a desire to go looking for artists. And this searching is what brings him to Bhuri Bai. And honestly, Bhuri Bai was not alone. She wasn't the only person that Swaminathan approached. In fact, he approached many other people, indigenous people that he encountered, and he gave them paint and paper. And these people would go on to become some of the biggest names. But we'll come to that in a little bit. And there you have those. Do you see the paintings on the image on the left? So when Bharat Bhavan opened, um, her works were put up in the first exhibition, and Bhuribai didn't know that they would hang on the walls of the same building that she had helped build. And when Bharat Bhavan opened in Rupankar Gallery, her works were displayed alongside works that Swaminathan and his scouts had collected on their drives, but also they'd invited artists to come and make works in situ. So here you have paintings and sculptures and objects and new works like Bhuribai's works, first encounters with paper, and all of this was framed and put up on walls. And amongst the artists who were displayed here were those were names who would go on to form a generation of firsts, just like Bhuribai, in what I can only describe as the colliding worlds of Adivasi art and contemporary art in India. So why were they being displayed in an inaugural exhibition? Why did so many people throng to the gallery? In fact, who came to see them? Again, Jyoti Bhatt's photographs help us. Some of the biggest names in Indian art, at least back then, I mean, even today, but even back then, these were well-established scholars and poets and revivalists and critics, and they all came to Bharat Bhavan. They came to see this wonderful institution that had been built, and it was they who would walk into the gallery and view these artworks. Here are some names you can see, but I think even if you can't recognize their faces, you might recognize the names. You have Manjeet Bawa, Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay, a revivalist. You have Geeta Kapoor, you have Bhupen Khakar, you have Vivan Sundaram, Mrinalini Mukherjee. All of these were also friends of Swaminathan, and he invited them to Bharat Bhavan's opening, and they were there and they were looking at these works by indigenous artists. And really, that is the core of, I think, what Swaminathan wanted to do. Because he was making a case for Adivasi art. He wanted to make a case for Adivasi art, and he wanted to make a case for it to be accepted within the conversation of contemporary art in India at that time. Then Rupankar, a few years later, Rupankar Gallery, still under Swaminathan's directorship, in 1987 came out with a book called The Perceiving Fingers. It is a catalogue of the Rupankar collection of folk and Adivasi art from Madhya Pradesh. That's the cover. And in the years since Bharat Bhavan had been inaugurated, I think it was 5 years since then, Swaminathan had been busy, Rupankar Gallery had been busy. They had collected hundreds of artworks. These were drawings and paintings and murals and in a variety of media artworks that they'd found on their scouting drives or made by artists on site, like I said. And they'd all been put together into one collection and they were put forward in this catalogue. But this catalogue is particularly important because it is in this catalogue that Swaminathan is really pushing for us to consider Adivasi art, and he's really building a case for it. There are 60 pages of essays that Swaminathan has written, and they contextualize and really preface the entire catalogue. And this catalogue plays a very large role. It's very instrumental in establishing, or rather, I would say, introducing and making a case for Adivasi art within modern India. Here is a list of the essays that appear in the catalogue. The essays that appear in Perceiving Fingers, they really clue us into what Swaminathan is trying to achieve with Rupankar Gallery, with the folk art collection. He's speaking to an audience, he's speaking to his readers, and who are his readers? Really the wider art world. He's speaking to them through these essays, and he's telling them to consider Adivasi art in the contemporary period. And he's quoting scholars and philosophers and really building arguments on why we should look at Adivasi art. He quotes Karl Marx, he quotes Beria Elvin, Anand Kumar Swamy, Hal Foster, Engels, William Robin, Claude Levi-Strauss, everybody. And in these essays, he's also contextualizing for us various indigenous philosophies, origin myths, concepts of time, really building a serious case for Adivasi art and using academic language and inviting us to look at these art forms and look at them differently. He's encouraging his reader to do this. Um, he's encouraging his reader to say, open your eyes to their art. This is what he's saying. Ours is not a socio-economic or anthropological study of Adivasi communities. Ours is an attempt to open our eyes to their art. And he is really going for this idea and saying, naturalism that is taught in classrooms, that art should be mere replication of what the eye sees. Art can't simply be that. We can't simply think of that as art. And we really have to remove the blinkers of what our former English mentors, and he's referring to the British colonial education system, the art education system. And he's saying we need to disregard it and really rethink our approach to how modern art and Adivasi art can be seen with some amount of parity. Here's another quote that I find extremely interesting and that I would like you to think about. He says the scope of Adivasi imagination contained is not contained by the constraints of naturalism, although it hovers over nature and derives sustenance from it. And you can see what he means when you look at these artworks from the 80s that he's also encountering, because he's actively speaking with the artists, understanding what they're drawing, and he's trying to build these arguments based on what he's seeing. And he tells us, and he invites us rather, take a leap from the footboard of sight into the realm of vision. Forget your naturalistic blinkers and forget about art as just representation. Forget about sight, forget about what your eye is seeing. Start feeling, really. And in Perceiving Fingers and through the collection of Rupankar, this is what he's trying to do. Art is about experience, he says. Art is about perception. It's about actively feeling. It's about participating in the painting. You don't just look at it, you participate in it. That is at the core of what he's trying to do with Rupankar, and that is the core of what he will continue to do, what he will continue to push for over the next few decades through Rupankar and the work they're doing. So Swaminathan's attempts to build bridges between Adivasi and the mainstream art world was also important because he was helping to set an empathetic tone through which other artists, such as Mrinalini Mukherjee and Jyoti Bhatt, they were finding space to engage with indigenous art forms that existed. But his quest to find and highlight indigenous artists and to present it to the art market would actually go on to have several consequences. When he created a space for indigenous artists to enter the commercial art field alongside their mainstream counterparts, he was creating a space for them to not be considered simply as traditional practitioners of an art form, but really as individual artists in their own right. And this is the period in the late 80s and the early 90s. We see that folk and tribal art, indigenous art is witnessing legitimization, it's seeing inclusion, and mainstream artists and academicians, they begin talking about these art forms. And much like Bhuri Bai, other artists whom Swaminathan had found, whilst they had started painting any which way they knew, soon their work was, picked up, not just by Bharat Bhavan, by other art galleries, and they had access to more materials, more techniques, to a PR system that galleries had, and soon they were being championed as discovered artists. And this helped to establish them in the market, really, and people started paying more attention to individual artists. And Swaminathan was actively encouraging the idea of equality between indigenous artists and non-indigenous artists. He said, they are not necessarily coming from folk traditions. Don't look at them as folk artists. Look at them as artists who function as visionaries, just like you would look at any of your modern and contemporary artists. Give them that same, put them on the same level when you're talking about them. And at Rupankar, he made sure that every individual artist's work was given credit, it was given name. He was really trying to draw out each artist as an individual. One notable example that many of you might recognize, of course, is Jangar Singh Sham. He is similarly somebody that Swaminathan had met. I think he was working also at Bharat Bhavan, and Swaminathan gave him pen and paper, and the rest is really history. Jangar Singh Sham is really, these are his works, as you can see. And he would go on also to have an incredibly rich career as an artist. Over 4 decades, since 1980s, Adivasi art forms slowly, as I said, found their place in the context of modern and contemporary Indian art. Buyers began to pick them up, galleries began to show them, institutions around the country began to invite these artists, began to show their works, and over time, they, both the artists and what they made, it took flight, and they ended up being shaped and reshaped by a number of forces at play: their own personal lives, galleries, museums, art markets, collectors, and the demands of the customer, of course. Let's come back to Bhuri Bai. In October 2020, I found myself in Bhopal for the first time in my life. Why was I there? The Museum of Art and Photography, who I work with, based in Bangalore, has a number of paintings by Bhuri Bai, and we wanted to build an exhibition of her works. And as a first step, naturally, we looked at all her works, we pulled them out, we started looking through her works, and very quickly it seemed as if the paintings grouped themselves together, like two very distinct set of paintings emerged. One set we saw was on faded yellowing paper, and we knew that they were tentatively dated to the 80s and 90s. They're all unsigned. We think they might be Bhuri Bai's work. We can't be sure. The colors are just red, black, and green. The shapes are very visceral, and they're in tableaus. We know they're tableaus. We know something's happening, but we can't quite interpret them. And these are very almost dreamlike shapes. Here's another one of those. Here's a few more. Just the four on the left are from the map collection. The ones you see with the triangular horse forms are from different collections. But we saw these works, and they clearly belong to like one period. You could tell by the paper. And then you had another set of paintings by the same artist, and completely, different vivid colors. The shapes are naturalistic, and they have this incredible dotted patterning on them, and it's nothing like the other shape, and you can tell that the forms are very confident, and just maybe they could be made by the same artist. Of course, we know they're made by the same artist because we keep records, but they're so entirely different from each other that I would have made the mistake of presuming they're by two different artists. Here are more of those newer ones from the 2020s. So when we saw this, the first question we asked ourselves was, why are they so different? What do those earlier paintings mean? And really, what do we know about this artist? It turns out we knew very little about the artist. We spent a few months searching, found almost nothing about her. Very little had been written about Bhuri Bai. Just, we could really tell that lots of texts had been recycled multiple times across sites. Of course, her work was being sold across many online platforms, but we couldn't find out more about Bhuri Bai, and we were really curious. So we rang the artist. In September 2021, we rang the artist, began trawling websites, read a little, learned about Bharat Bhavan, learned about Swaminathan's meeting with Bhuri Bai, found Bhuri Bai's number, made a few phone calls, and then we asked her, can we come visit you? And she said, yes, of course. I set out. She said I could find her in the tribal museum. It's called the Rashtriya Manav Sangrahalaya. It means, literally translates to the Museum of Man. And it's located in the center of Bhopal. And it is a very, very beautiful space. Very surreal, but very beautiful. Every surface, perhaps just the floor, is unpainted. Every other surface is covered in some form of art, and you can tell that this is indigenous art. Even the pillars and ceilings have paintings on them. And in a very quiet corridor, at one glass top table with a little portable AC, Bhuri Bai sits. When I reached her, her tabletop was very clear, but she had been waiting for me. And as I said hello and settled down, she pulled out her working base, a few paints, all very ordinary material, anything you would get at a regular stationery shop, and really piles of paintings. She just kept pulling out paintings. I had come prepared with my own sheaf of paintings. These were colored photocopies of all the works that we had at MAP. And we began to talk. As I pulled out paintings and, asking her, are these your works? Do you remember making them? When did you make them? Each image really was I don't know, like a springboard for more conversation. Every painting held some memory for her. She could recall making all of them. She began explaining to me what each painting shows, and each painting has a backstory to it, whether it's one of a peacock, of a car, of an elephant. And she was able to, really draw connections between each painting that I was pulling out in moments in her life. And that's when the story emerged. And she actually began telling me the story where I began telling you the story with her meeting with Swaminathan in 80 or 81 at that construction site. And then, after telling me all of this, one whole evening later, she tells me, why don't you come home? In fact, I have something at home that will help you, really understand the story better. And clearly you want to learn more. There's more we can chat about. And she takes me home. The next day I went home. And once we were comfortably seated at her home, she begins to pull out more paintings, photographs, and awards, and catalogs, and publications. And you can see these fat files she has kept on her work, on things that have been written about her. And she was just sitting there surrounded by her entire life's work. And I asked her, where did you find I mean, you've been collecting them all these years? She said, yeah, I've been collecting them because I don't know what's written in them. And I said, what do you mean you don't know what's written in them? She said, well, I can't read or write. And people just keep sending these to me and I don't know what they say. And that was very interesting to us. And I said, well, that's quite a shame. But you do know that your works have been shown like everywhere. They've gone to Paris. They've been shown at fancy places. And she said, what? My works have gone to Paris? I didn't know. And so it turns out, while as I was talking to her, it turns out she has this incredible collection of paintings that she has made, of things that have been written about her. And so little of that has made its way to her. Her home is also a studio. She keeps her records there. She makes her paintings there. She keeps endless paintings there. Really, they're rolled into tubes. There are just so many of them. And she showed me the paintings, and the images were striking because again they look so much like the recent set that I'd seen. Those very bright images that I showed you from the museum's collection, right? Here they are. I've taken some photographs. And I can see that somewhere her repertoire has changed. All kinds of animals, more animals, in fact, plants, modern objects, they have begun showing up. And then I can't help but ask her, when did this become your style? Because she looks at her old paintings and she says, yeah, those are my works, but now I make these kind of works. And I say, what happened? How did this style come to be? And she said, yeah, this is Bhil art. And then she began explaining. She said, see, until the 1990s, I only knew black, red, green because those are the colors I'd used in back home when I was a kid, and I used soot and earth materials to make paintings. But slowly I realized that the market has a variety of synthetic colors. And as I drew, I learned to draw better. The shapes started coming more natural. I would close my eyes and think about a peacock. And finally, my peacock started looking like what I wanted them to look. I started becoming familiar with the brush. I started becoming familiar with more colors, and so I started drawing more things because now I realized I could draw. So she was very honest about, like we kept looking at her old works, and she was very honest. She said, "See, when I began painting, it was not familiar to me. I didn't know how to orient myself. I didn't know what it meant to sit down and paint even. Like in my head, the painting was straight, but I would sit on one side of the paper today and make a painting that way. And then tomorrow, when I returned to my painting, I would sit on the other side and paint that way. And Swaminathan thought that was cool, but slowly over time, I realized that's not how people make painting. And for her, this shift is very important because she has really taught herself how to orient her drawing. She has taught herself how to work with the material. She had an emphasis on the fact that in the beginning, even the portability of paper and canvas was so alien to her that she would paint in different angles with her characters falling all over themselves. And these innovations really form a key part of her journey as an artist. Over time, of course, she became comfortable, she refined her shapes, and you've seen what her modern work, more recent works look like. And the way she draws today, it's all crafted through over 40 years of trial and error in an effort to make this new medium her own. Here are some more paintings back from the 80s. There's another one from the 80s. Um, Another few. And you can really tell the difference between these early works and something like this. These are what Bhuribai's works look like today. And they've progressed into these incredible tableaus that sometimes tell stories, folk tales and children's stories, like the one on the left. Sometimes they show Adivasi life, memories from home, in contrast to modern times. You see that little computer screen, you see a little bullock cart. These paintings, they depict scenes from specific places and moments, but also like you can see how her form has shaped. And what is really notable is this development of this use of dots. We know that in her older work, she was partial to decorating her forms with dots, but it's really now that you see these dots have become, there's a certain discipline to the dots. They're multicolored and they're tightly placed in these very hypnotic patterns. Um, and this change in style, she's very open to say, well, I saw a car one day. I saw a car and this man had a flat tire, and I thought, why don't I paint it? And you really see that these little instances from her travels, from her encounters with the modern world as she begins traveling, they start impacting what she's drawing. No longer is she drawing, necessarily just memories of home. She's drawing everything around her, and she's doing it in this new style that she has built up. Here is another quote actually. Based on what people brought from me, I brought it. Bought from me, I brought a change into my works from the old style to the new style. And now I think I should have kept my older works with care. For so many years, I'd just thrown them away, and now they're gone. I feel a bit sad about it, but that I myself am disrespecting my art, and I feel this very deeply. Now, this is a sentiment she came up with when I actually began showing her some of her older works. I think she's quite happy. I mean, she does say that she's very happy with her new style, but there's a certain amount of nostalgia for the older style that we brought and showed her. Um, and she told me, I have none of my older works left. I've sold them. You won't believe it. I don't have a single one left. Will you do me a favor? You have these anyway in the museum. Will you leave these with me? And I had about 20 or 30 of these, even the ones not in map collection, some of these. Um, some of these ones which I had taken photocopies of. And so I said, sure, I have digital versions of these. I don't need them. You can keep them. And she said, thank you so much. Of course, I didn't ask her why she wanted them. I thought it was a little bit of nostalgia. And I handed them over. And now, 3 months ago, I was preparing for this talk, and I started watching a recent video that BMW commissioned for the India Art Fair, and just the most amazing thing caught my eye. You see, she's teaching these women how to paint. Do you see they're copying from these paintings? Those are paintings that I left with her. Those are the photocopies I left with her. And it really struck me that, well, I mean, I should have expected this, because she told me she teaches a lot of younger people to paint and draw. And so that's why she had asked me for her older works. She's using them as teaching aids to show a whole new generation of young people how to paint like her. And those are paintings from the map collection. Another one that I left with her, and under her very watchful eye, they're practicing their painting. And this was like a very full circle moment for me. And so today we are so used to seeing artists from indigenous communities who paint on paper. You do a quick look online, just type tribal art or peel art, and you'll see a lot of artists' work on sale. And this imagery has really become recognizable. But it is important to emphasize that it all began with somebody like Bhuri Bai. She encountered those materials for the first time, and over time, other people from the community followed. She created space for more people to come in and pick up a paintbrush and pick up a paint. And then a new painting tradition emerged. So, really, like her being the first woman from her community becomes even more important, not simply because she's taking that first step, but from that first step to today, she's really created the space for other artists. And so, from those first conversations that we had with her, a few things became really clear to us. She's very proud of her life, and it features very large in her art. It's very important to her that she be recognized as the first to make foray into the mainstream art world, because it was not easy. But she also takes pride in her identity as a Bhil woman. She's an artist, she's a woman, but she's a Bhil artist, she's a Bhil woman. And that brings us to the question, what is Bhil art? When we began working on the exhibition, intending to curate it with Bhuri by herself, we didn't know how the exhibition would take shape. But when we heard this entire story and we started looking at her life and we discovered how her art has changed over time, one thing that kept coming up was Bhil art. She said, today I'm a Bhil artist. I make Bhil art. That's how she refers to her own work. She made it very clear to us that she's not following traditions, but she's innovating. She's pioneered a new visual and she chooses to call this visual Bhil art. And while Bhuri Bai has been instrumental in creating a market for what is called Bhil art today, her work has also added substantial appeal to creating a market for other Adivasi artists' works. Over the years, she has trained several artists, mostly out of her own work, out of her own home. She has had multiple workshops across India, and really, it's called Bhil art today. And a new generation of aspiring artists are being trained as Bhil artists. What is Bhil art, you might ask me? This is what it looks like. These are not works by Bhuri Bai. None of these are Bhuri Bai's works. These are works by other artists that she has trained to paint in a style that she has evolved. And what strikes us really in these conversations that we've been having with her is that she's very pragmatic about being an artist. She's very clear about, yes, there is an element of creative labor. Yes, I've had an incredible journey to finding my place here. But also, my art sells. My art is how I make my money. It's how I support my home. So why should I not teach it to an entire generation of younger kids and show them how to be an artist, because they are not going to have the same financial and social privileges that comes with growing up in cities and going to fancy art colleges. She's very clear about it. And whilst we may be really concerned about originality and where does Bhil art lie, she's very matter of fact. She says, well, this is Bhil art. Sure, it's not Pithora painting. It's not Pithora painting. Pithora painting is different. This is Bhil art. And it came from somebody like her. And so as we were putting there's more of those works, and really as we were putting those works together, it became very clear to us that here was a lady who really, young girl actually, who took something in her stride, worked with it, opened up the space for so much conversation, and pioneered a style that is so recognizable today. Nature-based subjects, bright colors, tightly placed multicolored dots. You have these very lovely swirls, very, very painstaking work. And they're sold online as Bhil art, and they give livelihood to a whole generation of artists. Whilst there wasn't a Bhil style, today we have a thriving art style pioneered by this one lady, and she's made the space for other artists to come forward and take Bhil art and shape it into something else. And this is, of course, not an isolated story. I mean, a similar case can be made for Gond art, because Jangar Singh Sham began painting, and his style was later morphed and picked up by other artists. And today they paint and make a livelihood out of painting in the Gond style. So when we started putting this exhibition together, the first version we made was a digital exhibition, and we realized that all the other exhibitions that had put Bhuri Bai's work forward really were just images on a wall with a title sometimes made up by the gallery, and so divorced from her personal experience, so divorced from her life, from her narrative as an artist. And there was very little examination of the style she works with, the technique she works with, her choice of subjects. We were also very conscious about a very familiar narrative around appropriation of indigenous art, and the simplification really of their work by galleries and institutions. And therefore, we knew we wanted to make a conscious effort to really bring forward her views and ideas, and not overlay our assumptions onto her art practice. And you'll have a link to the digital exhibition, but the entire exhibition actually tells the story of Bhuribai's life, and really introduces you to her incredibly rich life. I didn't have the time to talk you through it. She's illustrated, like, I don't know, over 100 different books. She has had so many shows. She's been feted by government so many times, and it's really a life worth celebrating, and a legacy that is still evolving. It's still growing, and more importantly, it's a legacy that has made space for a new style to be born and for other artists to pick up this style. There is no mine here. She's opened the space up for other artists, other aspiring artists to come in, and we found ourselves building this exhibition centering Bhuribai's words, her own narrative. And we hope that we've done it justice. And I hope that this talk brings to you a little bit about our research process and the many things we learned along the way. For us, Bhuribai's legacy is about inspiring many conversations around Indigenous art and artists, and it strongly, I think, continues to inform, and shape the way we understand how marginalized groups can navigate art markets, and how they negotiate through the pitfalls of a very, very complex art market today. And we hope that this exhibition really does justice to the incredibly amazing story that she shared with us. I will leave you with that. And before I close, I would like to thank Bhuribai for her time and her patience with just never-ending questions. She's spent so much time talking to us. I'd also like to thank my two co-curators who helped put the show together, Nathaniel Gaskill and Mustafa Khanbhai, and all my colleagues at MAP Academy and the Museum of Art and Photography. Also, a massive thanks to Muskan and Madeleine at Try Art and Culture Kolkata. We just took the exhibition physical. It was a digital exhibition, and now it's found a physical space in the city of Kolkata. And if you live in Kolkata, I hope you're able to go see it. Thank you so much, Try Art and Culture. This project is very, very dear to me. It was my first major research collaboration with an artist, and I'm super grateful to the MAP Academy for giving me the ethos and principles that have guided this project. At the MAP Academy, we are trying to create and sustain progressive, equitable, and collaborative ways of approaching artists and communities. And I hope that this project has done that, even in the littlest degree. Thank you, everybody. That's about it. Thank you.